Employers of Reddit. What is the most scandalous thing you have ever encountered during a background check of an applicant? Story 1. My dad owns a business and had a resume of someone who he thought was perfect for the job, maybe a little too perfect, so he called up the man's recent employer and asked about him. Apparently, the guy photoshopped 7 of his previous coworkers into illegal situations, e.g., smoking marijuana, drinking on the job, and got all of them fired. My dad did not hire that man, a lot of people are asking. So, they'll just put it here. He was applying for a graphic design job. Story 2, I've told this before, and it didn't progress all the way to a background check. But I was interviewing a guy for a mechanic position in a plant. We were reviewing his work history when he nonchalantly volunteered that he had spent several years in prison for raping his daughter. Story 3, not a background check, but a good story. Hired a guy, he was 50 or so. Everyone liked him. My client even interviewed and liked him. One day, he doesn't show at his office offsite. Call him. No answer. Next day, same story. Day after, no changes. On the 4th day, at 10 p.m., my phone rings. It's another employee yelling for me quickly to turn it to a channel. Turns out my employee made the lead story. He went to a bar, picked up a younger girl, and they went to his place. Well, he chains her to his bed, starts popping Viagra like Tic Tacs, and rapes her repeatedly over the next few days. He finally passes out due to exhaustion, and she escapes and is picked up by police naked, running down the road. His BG check was spotless. You never know. Story 4, I'm actually the employee, not the employer, but ID thought I'd share this one. When I applied for my first job, I got a call saying something came up when they did the background check. I was surprised because my background check should have been completely clean, never even gotten a speeding parking ticket. But something came up that happened the next date over in 1994. I was born in 1990. I had to fill out a bunch of paperwork, fax documents, and just basically go through a lot of hassle to prove that I wasn't the world's most bad little 3-year-old. Edit, this is what the face of a hardened criminal apparently looks like, if anyone was wondering who to look out for. Story 5, not so much scandalous as funny. I worked for a payroll division of company one summer. We dealt with taking out employees who had not worked for the company in over a year. My supervisor's job was to call any new applicants who had checked yes that they had a felony. She calls this woman up and speaks with her for a few minutes and hangs up, bursts out laughing. We asked what was up, and this girl has a record because she was driving a boat in Florida and accidentally hit a manatee. She said that was one of the dumbest reasons she heard someone having a record. Story 6, had a guy apply for a teaching position, called his previous employer, and the way they spoke of him raised an alarm. Googled his name and school district and found out he lost his job for with students. I'm not sure why he wasn't in jail or still had his license. Story 7, I was interviewing a guy for a manager position and was planning on hiring him. Mentioned that he'd have to do a background check. Straight out said he would not pass because of an armed robbery and assault charge. Seemed like a normal guy to me. Story 8, did you know that when you get drug tested, they also test for alcohol? I didn't know that, but someone we were about to hire was legally drunk when they peed for their drug test. Since there is some interest, it'll give some additional details. My boss interviewed this person, then had them come back for a follow-up interview, and I interviewed them as well, mostly discussing video games. Then, from what I understand, a day or two later my boss called and offered them the job starting the following Monday. But they needed to take a drug test before they started, so they needed to call and make an appointment for some time over the next couple of days. Monday came and I was like, so, is new person starting today? Boss was like, no. They failed their drug test. For what? Alcohol, they test for that, yep. Apparently new person was above the legal limit for alcohol at like 10 a.m. on a Thursday, yep, at a test that they scheduled the time for, yep. Story 9, someone who did 20 years in prison for murder, someone else who was arrested for attempted murder, someone else who was arrested for throwing oranges at people. Edit, all of these people were hired. Story 10, I worked in a sandwich shop in London for a while. 2 of the girls that were always up to some and stole more ingredients and food than most. I'm pretty sure both were treating the place as a free supermarket. But whatever, I can't deny I sneaked a few free dinners myself. Hey, I was a student. One day I went to the bathroom to find them walking out with 2 long bread rolls and big grins on their faces. I saw the same bread rolls later under the counter. A certain man came in and ordered 2 large bread rolls with fillings. One took them from under the counter and began to prep them. I asked the other what was up as she was watching and trying not to laugh. She told me the guy was a creep and they didn't like him, so they ran the bread rolls around a toilet bowl and other things. Apparently, he would always order the same thing. I immediately walked over to the prep area, faked a trip, and sent both preps to the floor, and they had to be remade with new bread. I later told the manager, and both were fired on the spot. I left a few shifts later, as the other workers there didn't seem too pleased with my actions. I don't care how creepy the guy was, he was a little slimy, but I thought more just socially awkward. Nobody deserves that kind of. I also took the time to report the outlet to the head office. I had been in there since, and it did seem like entirely new staff working there. Story 11, I wasn't responsible for hiring the individual, but I was one of his managers. After a few complaints from both customers and his coworkers, I started to urge upper management into looking through this guy's background because something didn't seem right. Sure as he was let go from his previous workplace for harassing someone, and he had been to jail for domestic abuse. Best part, someone at corporate ran his background check before he was hired and still offered him a job. Story 12, my sister's boss found out not through a background check, but through word of mouth, which was later verified that the IT guy there had been convicted of taping ladies in the shower also, jerking off in their shampoo. Story 13, funny flip side story. I was interested in going back to school to become a teacher, and a friend of mine knew of a part-time instructional assistant job that I could apply for while I go through the interview process and get to the point where I'll be hired depending on a background check. While I didn't have a driver's license or any other photo ID, I could not obtain a driver's license for a few more months because of reasons. So there was my dilemma: need ID for background check, need background check for job. I informed my new employer of this predicament, and they let me know that it's okay. There's a 30 grace period from the date of hire to the date that I need to have the background check completed by them. So I said cool and showed up to work, totally helping kids with math and monitoring recess. Working with kids age 7 to 12 with nothing more than my friends saying I was an okay guy as proof that I wasn't some wacko. I tried everything: state ID, no. Waiting period was longer than my grace period. Costco membership, apparently an acceptable form of photo ID. Nope. Need a photo ID to get a photo Costco ID. Oh, now it makes sense. But wait a minute. I have this badge that I was issued at the school. It has my picture and my name. By badge, of course, I mean the MS Paint creation done by the librarian on my first day, laminated by said librarian. It was the only time I ever spoke to the librarian. So I took my badge down to the sheriff's office to get fingerprinted, and my background check was complete. All I had to do to get the job was to complete and pass a background check, providing photo ID obtained from the job that I needed the background check to get. Story 14, in my company, standard practice is do search on their name, phone number, and email addresses from their CV. Occasionally, it turns up interesting factoids like patent applications, directorships, etc. A few years ago, a guy sent in a CV, and it read excellently. He was called for interview. Morning of interview, I do the basic search, and the guy's email turned up all his personal ads where he was looking for hung guys to his raw stuff about role play and other looking for information on best places for gay cruising in several different cities, plus his pics. It throws a zillion red flags on the web filter, and I get called into HR, explain, and it's all good. I get asked to sit in on interview, and the guy aced it, bright, qualified, well presented, knew his stuff inside and out. An hour later, he got offered the job, but turned it down cause not enough international travel. He took a lower-paying job at a competitor and travels a lot in Europe. Hopefully, he found a right kinky guy to keep him happy. TLDR applicant's kinky personal ads get me an interview by HR. He still didn't accept the job. Story 15, 248 counts of sexual abuse of children, tampering with evidence, and creation design of obscene material. Apparently, he was secretly videotaping his stepdaughter using the bathroom, then selling it online. Story 16, a friend of mine was asked to review candidate resumes for a technical position, and one of the resumes was copied verbatim from my friend's own resume. Down to the last detail, the guy applying had found the resume somewhere, changed the name and contact details, and didn't even change the formatting. My friend had a good laugh about it, busted the guy for submitting a false resume, and forgot about it. 3 weeks later, the guy who had copied the resume had the audacity to threaten to sue for racial discrimination, since I was clearly the most qualified candidate. The only reason they had for not hiring me was that I'm Indian. My friend's company lawyered up, presented him with the concrete evidence that he had stolen someone else's resume and faked his credentials and employment history, and proceeded to blacklist the guy in. Unfortunately for the moron in question, was a very small industry. Ironically, the guy did have the skills and credentials to cut in the job he applied for, but apparently faked a better resume so he could argue for a higher starting salary, burn his bridges, and rendered himself unemployable in a field that he had worked hard to get a foot in the door. Stupidity on almost every level. Story 17, not an employer, but we tried to get an apartment with an old friend one time, and the apartment complex did our background checks and was told to come in to explain some things. Now, our friend has had a rough past, but he truly changed into a better man, an actual productive member in society, if you will. We knew he would have some stuff that would show up that still haunts him from the past, but we were hoping that since it's been so long ago that maybe they would be forgiving. Anyway, the lady checked my record clean, my wife's record clean. When she did his record, we very quickly realized that he wasn't entirely thorough with us about his past. The lady looks at us, looks back at the screen, and just sits there and thinking, okay, well, say his name is Fred. Fred, what the didn't you tell us? She so very calmly asks, so can you explain what this felony possession of weapon of mass destruction is all about? Mine and my wife's faces both go white and slowly look at Fred with a look of what the serious fuck on our faces, only to find him grinning and chuckling, saying, haha. Oh yeah, I forgot about that one. To make an even longer story short, in most states, it's a felony to be in possession of a modified weapon, such as a modified pistol that he failed to tell us about. And no, we didn't get the apartment. Story 18. I'm not a manager, but one of my coworkers was fired recently because of me. I work in a fairly small office, and this guy was someone I work closely with. He and I share an office with another coworker. Both myself and other coworker are female for a year and a half. He started walking around the office with his hanging out of his pants. I honestly thought it was an accident because he was a really nice guy. Went to church multiple times a week, had a wife had been married to for years, owned a home, and had 2 kids, and he was just generally a nice dude. Until one day he walked up to me and started asking me a bunch of questions about a hobby of mine that he's not interested in. And at the end of the convo, I noticed his junk was hanging out of his pants. All the previous times had been coming from going to the bathroom. This time, he specifically stopped washing dishes to come talk to me. I ended up telling my boss after the weekend, and the guy said it was an accident due to weight loss. The guy was not wearing underwear when it happened, and my boss said had lost the same amount of weight before and hadn't had any pants-related problems, and not intentional. My boss ended up firing him the next day, and the guy confessed that it was something Head had problems with in the past, and that Head gone to counseling for, but that he fell back into old habits. He immediately went back to counseling, which is the one plus side. Story 19. Well, we had this one guy who told us that he got a DUI, but his lawyer got rid of the charge after we had hired him. On his application, he answered no to the question, have you ever been convicted of anything other than a minor traffic violation? So I decided to simply look on the public records database. His DUI showed up along with domestic violence and a few other things. We let him go the next day. Story 21. Guy who applied for a job was a member of a black racist organization, the violent kind I might add. I refused to take him, of course. But the craziest part of that story is probably when my colleague overseeing the guy's application with me decided to go full retard. Tell me it's not racist because the guy is black. Only white people can be racist. And if I don't hire him, I'm a racist who hates black people. I made sure my colleague was let go by the end of the week. I hate racists of all colors equally. Story 21. Unpopular opinion here. If a person commits a crime, is arrested, serves time, and is released, is it right to deny them employment? I mean, I don't want to hire them, but if nobody does, I can see how they might end up back in a life of crime. Story 22. One time, while I was working at a nursing home, one of my fellow employees was fired. When I asked my boss what happened, she said the police called and said he was wanted for breaking his parole. Apparently, he had been arrested trying to smuggle cocaine in Chicago or something and then ran when he got out. Story 23. From reading this thread, I have learned that if an American makes a mistake, they will never get a job or be able to rent a home for the rest of their life. Story 24. This is related, sort of. My 8th grade teacher had a warrant out for her arrest for an assault and DUI. She wasn't supposed to drive, didn't have a license, and still drove for multiple school trips. She ended up getting arrested a block away from school. Story 25. Not a background check, but this story literally happened last week. First, let me set the stage. I am 24 and have been working the current job for a little over a year. One of the members on our team was a really good guy and helped train me. He was always joking and seemed to be pretty happy all the time. Well, about 3 weeks ago, someone says he is out sick. The week goes by, and then the next week he is gone again. At this point, no one really knows why he isn't showing up for work, but we have our team meeting last week and are told that our coworker is no longer with the company, but the head manager will not tell us why. Then later that day, a coworker calls me over to my desk and says in a whisper, I found out what happened. She doesn't say anything and just pulls up some Google search results. Our coworker got sentenced to 35 years in prison for assaulting a relative that he lived with like 2 years ago. It was a complete shock to pretty much everyone. Story 26. I'm not convinced of the value of background checks. My employer doesn't do them anyway. I interviewed one guy who pointed to a 5-year gap in his employment record during the interview and told me that was when he was growing pot. He had picked up lab techniques and was self-employed during that time. Hired, worked out well. Worked with another guy who had spent 18 months inside for dealing and was on parole. Fantastic worker and leader. I helped him get promoted on the flip side. I hired an ex-cop who it turned out was awaiting his trial for with multiple minors. Another guy was arrested, but acquitted on a flimsy excuse for raping an intellectually disabled girl. Another filmed and distributed the gang rape a minor. None of these would have shown up in a background check, and they all caused a lot of grief at work. Story 27. At my workplace, a guy got hired on as a computer tech. A week goes by. He's doing great. One morning I arrive and he's gone. I talk to my boss and he shows me why. Boss just happened to be Googling the guy and there appeared photos of him in prison jumpsuits in a cocaine rehab program. He hadn't shared that on his application, but then if he had, he would have been weeded out then, and there, edit to clarify, HR discovered first that the guy had a felony conviction, and my boss was stuck having to give him the axe. Story 28. I worked with a cook for a while. I left the job for school, and when I came back for winter break, he was gone. Apparently, earlier that week, he had been arrested for having tens of thousands of files a child. He had been a really nice guy from what I knew of him, and everyone I talked to was completely shocked. Story 29. This is going to get buried, but one of my jobs said they got bonuses for hiring convicted felons. I thought it was kind of cool, the whole give people a second chance, except it was the cafe at my school. Story 30. I did a background check on a construction worker and found the following confusing combination: rape, stalking, securities investment fraud. I imagined that he was a debauched 80s guy and dubbed him Patrick Bateman. Story 31. I've never actually employed anyone myself, but one of the places I worked at never did background checks until an incident they had. It was a restaurant job and they hired mostly high school kids. One of the managers was a registered offender and they found out when a customer brought in one of the info sheets you can get online. Turns out our little restaurant was right down the street from a school, and it violated his probation. After that, they started doing more background checks on employees. Story 32. We didn't find out till after we fired this guy. We weren't doing them when he was hired. Not a bad dude, calm and polite. Turns out every story he told us was a lie, because he just got out of prison for brutally murdering his dad when he was 16, served 20 years for it. Story 33. Not an employer, but I have a fun background check story. When I was in college, I worked through a temp agency during the summers. They liked me, and I was reliable, so I got good assignments they called offering a choice gig that required background check. I jump at it. A week passes. Well into the time, they told me I'd be working, and no call about when and where to report. I call them, and my rep tells me she's really sorry. The job was already done, but got misfiled as current. I accepted the apology, knowing they'd find me something more soon enough. Then my rep adds, "Oh, we did the background check before we realized a mistake. Your record is totally clean, but somebody else has been using your social security number." Story 34. We had an application come through, and it had a number of red lights. Applicant stated they lost a job due to a month in jail, but there was a 6-year employment gap. They also walked in for info on the position. That usually is a flag also. We need people that can drive, and usually walking means no license. We hadn't run the BG and we're about to, but I did some searching first. And there she was, lifelong offender, first degree on a minor multiple times, 6 years prison, also a number of DUIs. 2 DUIs are enough to not get hired, but throw in the whole raper thing, nope. Story 35. I had a double header trying to fill in construction estimator position. The first applicant just got out of prison for defrauding some cities and counties on construction contracts. Not quite the right person for an estimator. Then the next guy turned out to have a offender background. On this one, HR was willing to let the guy explain the situation. Maybe he was 18 and she was 17, etc. But he firmly said no and walked out. Story 36. I'm late to the party, and this will certainly be buried. But here goes. My previous job was a weird experience. I was offered a position working IT, but weren't really told what my job would be. Get there on my first day to find out we don't even have an office. We are working in a rented space that is most akin to a library. You just pick a spot at the table and do your work. The place was hip, young, and trendy, so it was actually kind of nice. We were working remotely, and everything is to be done out of this place. No big deal. My supervisor and I are the only ones from our company in this building, and he is there for just a couple days to train me. And there will be a new guy starting a week, and I have to train him. No big deal. My supervisor was a hilarious guy, and we spent a good portion of the first day talking about guitars. Well, this was a Monday. My supervisor leaves Wednesday, and I'm all alone. I barely know WTF I'm doing, but I'm going to kick at it. I get to work. New guy starts on Monday. I get all our spreadsheets in order, get a strategy to do our work. Awesome. I'm ready. New guy is a brick. So much hand-holding, he can't do anything on his own. Checks in with me every 5 minutes. I'm not your supervisor, SDFU. Keeps talking about how he plans to get to the airport for his vacation in a month. WTF? I couldn't possibly care less. He talked about that every good day. Last I recall, they were going to get a town car. I suggested a limo. Why the not? How many vehicle options are there? Seriously. So, after about 2 months of babysitting, I could get offered a full-time position elsewhere with the same company. Jump on the opportunity. Other dude get a job a week later. Damn it, we both need to go get drug tested. We take the train together. He has no idea how to do anything. Seriously, I'm amazed he has been able to keep alive this long without choking on his own saliva. About a week after the drug tests, We all get an email that he's been let go. I'm not surprised because he's not a very capable person. Turns out that's not the reason. A Google search of his name, and we find that this guy defrauded the quick government of $7 million in equipment in his previous job and had done a couple years of hard time as a result. Now, I can't get into the particulars. I can't explain how he ever passed my company's background check. I don't know. I can't explain how he defrauded the government. It was quite elegant, actually, or how he got caught. It was quite stupid, actually. However, once we started contracting at the new place and they caught it, he was gone immediately. He always seemed innocent enough, very unassuming. I never would have imagined. TLDR, my old coworker stole $7 million in equipment from the U.S. government. Sometimes I get because in my same state, within an hour of my hometown, some guy has the same name I do. I have a pretty rare name, so you don't see it very often. This dude was convicted of assaulting children. When people do Google searches on my name, the articles about his trial are first on the list. It helps now that he is in jail for decades, but sometimes they have to do a closer look to clear me. Story 37, it's way too late, but my aunt's husband had his identity stolen by his identical twin brother. The twin proceeded to commit a bunch of felonies, so that shows up on every background check. Edit, I should add, he has a super common name, like John Smith level of common, so it doesn't come up when you Google him, just during an in-depth background check. Story 38, I once had. Yes, the famous George Zimmerman applied for a job at the Parks Department of Miami. It was before the Trayvon Martin case, and we really wanted to hire him, but a younger got the job instead because of his ties to the mayor. I would have framed that application. Story 39, not a BG check, but Eve been off-site for the last few months at this prototyping supplier my company hired to develop our injection mold tool for this project I'm on. So like 2 weeks back, they hired in this a new head of sales, kind of a chump, but whatever, nothing significant, seemed chill. But then the other day, one of the two secretaries mentioned in passing that he had a nice phone, some big Galaxy something or other, big screen, good definition, all that jazz, and the guy goes, you should see how it looks on it. And then I proceeded to load a video and show it to her in the middle of the front office. Owner caught wind of it like 30 minutes later, fired him on the spot. Best day I've had at work in 2 months. Story 40, I had a nice normal guy, middle-aged, very well-mannered, was just about to offer him a new extended contract when I realized I had to do a background check. Turned out he was a hardcore Nazi and a convicted arsonist. And I actually went to the high school he burned down. Later found out that he beat the out of his children on a regular basis and was convicted again. Story 41, after mentioning to my wife that you really have to be aware of your own personal online presence. I received an application while we were shopping. After a quick Google search on my phone, I knew that the applicant had a history of drug use and stole from a previous employer to feed their habit. Story 42, my father owned a marketing business for a long period of time. He would organize a lot of in-store demos for products, so they were always looking for people in multiple states that could train to learn about the product and then go into the store to sell that product. He had one guy in his 50s come in, extremely smart and friendly individual, automatically clicked with everyone he came into contact with, had knowledge about multiple products from this company, even had a few degrees like for hire, does so well at the store level. My dad brought him into the office to become a trainer. About a year after he was initially hired, things got odd. He was really secretive about his personal life, which wasn't that big of a deal, was getting in arguments with multiple coworkers out of nowhere, and some products he was set to demo never returned to the office. My dad and his VP decided to do a background check on a guy to see if he had any criminal history regarding theft, etc. Well, there wasn't any theft, but they dug up that he had just served a 20-year jail sentence. Why? He got into an argument with his parents and took them both down with a shotgun when he was in his 20s. Edit TLDR, dad hired and promoted great new employee. After background check discovered, he just got out of jail for murdering his parents. Story 43, I work at a farm. We raise game birds like pheasants and quail. We don't generally do background checks on new employees, but a friend of mine said I should do it more often since it could prevent some bad things in the future. So last fall I had an opening for a new position. Basically, it's called a wrangler. Sometimes birds get out of the cage's pens and then don't know what to do. They stick right next to the cage pen trying to get back in. So a wrangler has to go catch them. It's a pretty simple part-time job. I had a really good applicant. He had stellar letter of recommendation from the local club and a family history of working in this line of business. I had practically offered him the job, but was waiting on the background check. Good thing I did. The guy was freaking crazy at his last employment. He had chased down and killed it, eating it raw and warm. I was shocked. Anyways, I made sure to blacklist him in my area. If you happen to be in the farm business, do not hire this guy. Story 44, not an employer, but an employee with a dodgy coworker. We worked in a play center for kids' parents have to be present, and we're basically receptionists, waitresses, etc. So no background checks required, and we got hired at the same time. I thought he was a bit of an odd choice for a kid's play center. He slept in his car, and it was full of beer cans, but brushed it off. Then he started talking about how he used supermarket self-service machines to buy flat-screen televisions for the price of carrots, selecting a cheaper item instead of scanning the TV barcode, and how he sold them off black market style to make money. One day, he told me that he accidentally got caught up in some protest in Sweden, I think, outside an embassy, and ended up getting arrested for it. He hadn't really checked it out, as he didn't speak Swedish or the language the protesters were using, but thought it would be fun to join in. He said the protest was for the rights of an independent organization in Afghanistan being fought by the U.S. Army. Pretty sure he protested for the Taliban. Thankfully, he was sacked after a couple of weeks. I'd love to see what else was on his criminal check. Story 45, not an employer, but I can tell you that as an employee, I've been called back and told I couldn't work at a place because my background check wasn't clean. I'm looking at all these posts and realizing my misdemeanors aren't really that bad illegal lodging. I was homeless for a few years, yet I still don't get any jobs or callbacks. Story 46, a man who worked for Wells Fargo was hired and then fired after they found out about his criminal past. He put a fake coin in a machine at a laundromat in the 60s. Glad they caught that sick. Story 47, my stepmom's nephew's friend was trying to become a cop, and when they did the interview, they asked him, "Have you ever tried cocaine?" He replied with yes. Story 48, I have a big one. At a public policy type job I had years ago, a resume was circulated just in case any of us were hiring. The applicant was new to our country and had held the position of justice minister in a country well known for war, violence, etc., etc. Curious, I talked to someone I knew in a relevant government department and to the National Office of Amnesty International. Turns out the applicant was basically a warlord who was part of the losing side in an ugly civil war and had been responsible for who knows how much torture, executions, etc. in his African country. Edit. As a quick conclusion, it was a borderline evil but clueless colleague who circulated the warlord CV along with her handwritten recommendation that he might be a good candidate for something. I resisted the urge to embarrass her over it, but I did return it to her with a note that she might want to be careful about who she recommends. Story 49, I am on the other side of this coin, if you will. While I was fortunate enough to get a job right out of prison dismantling cars at a junkyard, I have not been able to get past the background check. Ever, actually, since I always disclose my past, I guess I never make it to the background check. One time I was pretty close to getting a job, but they withdrew the offer after the background check came back despite the fact that I had fully disclosed my convictions and prison time on the initial application and talked with the interviewer about them. I thought that was weird. It was as if they didn't believe me when I told them I had been convicted, offered me a job, then decided not to go through with it after they saw that I wasn't kidding. Story 50, when I was a manager at Pizza Hut, I had a guy come in to drop off an application. I would usually ask a few perfunctory questions when people turn in applications so I could get a feel for whether it was going to be worth my time to set up an interview availability, how many hours they were looking for, willing to work weekends, etc. Well, this guy comes in, and he seems a little off. After a couple of minutes, he explains that the checked yes on felony question because of a DUI, which wouldn't be a problem if he can get to work on time, but then he nonchalantly adds that he also has a conviction for domestic violence, but it's not as bad as it sounds. Technically, it was just assault. Needless to say, I never called that guy back. Story 51M in the UK. I was working in retail, and we used a contract company for security guarding. The company sent a guard who was pretty decent and did a good job. All contract guards have to be licensed in the UK, which consists of basic training and a full criminal record check. This guard had his legitimate license, and I had checked it out with the Security Industry Authority, SIA. Anyway, my company decided to get rid of the contract company and go with in-house security. This guard applied for a job in-house, and as he knew the job and the store I was going to take him on, I had to go through an interview with him as a formality. After the interview, I tried calling the guy for a week to tell him he had the job and the start date, but couldn't get hold of him. About 2 weeks later, I got hold of him, and he started with us. In-house security do not require a license, but it is my company's policy to do a full disclosure criminal check with security personnel. So I send off a disclosure form, and about 3 weeks later, I get the disclosure back. Usually these are one page, mainly blank with the words "no trace" on the top defining that there is no criminal history. I got a 4-page history of this guy. He had been convicted of theft from employer numerous times, drunk driving, driving while disqualified, driving without insurance or without a license, forging a prescription, and numerous theft and fraud offenses. The week in which I couldn't get hold of him was because he was in prison for failing to pay fines. Needless to say, he didn't continue employment, and it makes a farce of the whole SIA system. Really nice guy, though.